Hello and greetings. Welcome to Conversation with Tony Mobley. Today, Conversation with Tony Mobley is simulcast on both YouTube and LinkedIn. We have another surprise. We are actually experimenting with being on Facebook tonight as well. Welcome, radio listeners in Cincinnati, Ohio on Z98. You can hear us on the radio by going to Z98fm.com. On Conversation with Tony Mobley, I am talking with Dr. Hasmukh Gajjar, and the conversation is about transforming human capital through digital literacy. And I also need to add that Dr. Gajjar is the very first guest on Conversations with Tony Mobley. This is episode 85 of Conversations with Tony Mobley. Thanks everyone for being part of the journey. I want to thank the team behind Conversation with Tony Mobley and all of your hard work. ConversationWithTonyMobley.com is being provided with a chat courtesy of Alex Lindsay in 090. Why do I mention it? I mention it because you can go to conversationwithTonyMobley.com, participate in the Mukana chat. You can also participate in the Mukana chat, but by going to Conversation with Tony Mobley, you get the option of putting in your question and getting your question voted up or down. And that will ensure that you will get a chance to get your question asked in our conversation. Thank you so much again. Go to conversationwithTonyMobley.com where you can participate in the Mukana chat. And so we are going to get started right away. Welcome back, Dr. Gajjar. Please tell us what you are working on. It is so good to see you. And I have to, before Dr. Gajjar gets started, I want to share with everyone, it is 3 a.m. in Cape Town, South Africa, and he is still here with us, participating in this conversation. Thank you, Dr. Gajjar, for being here.
Good evening, Tony, and good morning from South Africa, Cape Town. I think this time we are much more prepared than our very first episode. I think we got my time confused, and so, but it was a very good start to your tenure on this program, and so
Absolutely.
Very hearty congratulations, Tony, on the 85th episode. Very well done. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So we're going to get to it. So tell us what you've been working on since the last time you were here.
Yeah, much change, and not. I've learned a lot, obviously, from participating in these online events. And as you know, my passion has been to promote literacy or technology, and mostly at the average individual on how they can harness the smartphones to live a reasonable digital lifestyle. And when I say reasonable, I mean most people have the smartphone as the only digital device here in South Africa, probably about 70% of the households, and probably 80% of devices connected to the internet is through the smartphone. So it's like we use any computer, we use 10 or 15% of the potential of a computer. It's no different with a smartphone. So I'm very passionate about making sure that our people harness the technology, leverage it, and most importantly, how can they utilize this device to have some economic benefit, real economic benefit by using it smartly. So, Tony, the passion hasn't changed since we met almost 2 years ago. And yeah, so that's ongoing, it hasn't changed at all.
Good, good. I'm glad to hear it. And we've had many conversations prior to conversation with Tony Mobley, and one of the things that we've talked often about was the importance of looking at a smartphone as a miniature computer, and that there are so many different things that you can do with it, and you can change it from a consumption device to a production device. And that's what we want to really get to tonight. But before we do that, I want you to explain our title for tonight in terms of transforming human capital through digital literacy. What does that mean?
Well, much of what I have to share with you is in the context of South Africa and probably most of the continent of Africa. The divide between those who have access to technology and those who don't is quite enormous. The economic barriers, but also literacy barriers. And the youth are very comfortable with diving into a smartphone. And, it's not a small computing device. It's probably more powerful than all the computing used during the Apollo 11, So it is a very powerful tool. And I think you did say that most of our folks here in South Africa utilize the device for consumption, and therefore there is entertainment, there is social media, but not really personal growth or productivity. So my passion and the content we create and what I often promote is be smart with your smartphone. Learn the very, very basics. Now, I'll give you one example. In South Africa, we have what we call an identity document. Without that, you cannot open a bank account. Often you cannot be employed. It's a passport, literally a passport to many services or general conduct. Even if you want your driver's license, you need your personal identity document. So we have a large population that lives in informal dwellings. And often they leave that document at home so they don't lose it. That's the one way of securing it. But when they need it and they're at the workplace, often they have to travel home. They have to photocopy that, have it certified, or as you in the US call it, notarized, take it back to the employer or wherever it's needed. And the economic fact is that they spend a lot of money simply to get a notarized document to wherever it's needed. So one of the simplest teachings that we undertake here is to say, your phone is actually a photocopier. And if you take a photo of your identity document and you've learned how to use the Google apps that come installed in most of the phones, because Android platform is a dominant platform here in South Africa, probably 80%. And if you've learned to use Google Mail and Google Drive, store your document on the Google Drive. And then wherever it's needed, you don't have to commute home. You don't have to photocopy it. Once you've known how to use Google Apps, simply mail the document to whoever needs it. And that has an economic impact on that individual who can hardly afford the data charges. So when I say transforming human capital, it's the notion of promoting that smartphone can also be a mobile classroom, a device that accesses the internet, but not just for entertainment or social media, but also how to utilize that to solve very simple problems and simple issues. So transforming human capital means that most of our folks have been left out of our education system. And therefore, I want to promote the fact that through the smartphone, they have the ability to access a library, because libraries do not exist in most of the communities. It just does not. So that's really what I mean, Tony, by transforming human capital through digital literacy.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And you have put your money where your mouth is from the standpoint. The next question is about S2L.
Mm-hmm.
So can you share how that can be? That what you just shared was amazing. Can you share other ways in which the phone can be used as a production tool?
Well, give you another example. We have, again, with the very large swathes of our population live in, as I said, informal dwellings. And we have a transport problem because our previous apartheid system confined people very far from the workplace, very far from the major cities. And therefore, what has evolved over time is what we call our taxi system, and there are thousands of them. So people get from place to place by utilizing these taxis. And often there's no formal address. There's no formal maps to get from one place A to place B. And therefore, one of the other things we promote is to say, if your visitor is coming to you, learn how to use Google Maps. Send them the PIN of your location. They can then show that to the taxi driver. Taxi driver can see exactly where the destination is, and therefore you don't have to spend more money on that taxi that he spends time and money to get from one location to another. So there are hundreds of many examples like that where I feel that if our folks understand how to utilize the smartphone, it's quite empowering. So we had a site before. My commercial entity, it's called Mobley Learn. So most of the content we were creating was under the brand of Mobley Learn. But we quickly realized that, yes, it's learning on a mobile device, but the nature of our activity had changed. But it has been very beneficial because the core part of our activity is creating videos. So we create many animated videos. We do a lot of post-production work, including podcasts, and we create a lot of digital assets. And we are on a very steep learning curve, and we implement all of this for our, what I call the passion, my personal passion on teaching people how to use a smartphone. So we created a new brand towards the end of last year called Something to Learn .online. I love S2L online. It says everything, something to learn online. And what we did is, instead of having nuggets of videos scattered all over the site, we basically aggregated them as a mini course, a lesson. So the Android videos actually is not just single video, it goes through all the different apps. We even have a Zoom course, we have a Teams course, and a WhatsApp course. So again, most folks use many of these applications at a very rudimentary level, and they can then access this learning content on S2L online. And, Tony, I have spoken before of language. We have 11 languages in this country. So I have anecdotal experience that people learn in their own language far more effectively than in a language that is not the home language. So we translate many of these videos in the local dialect, one of them called isiXhosa. And I'm sure it's not that easy to say isiXhosa. Yeah.
isiXhosa.
It's a click. And we even went as far as doing a course on how you submit and file your information with a local revenue service, for example. So when we go to the city centers, we see very long lines of our people trying to get into the revenue service, our version of IRS. Again, if they know how to use the smartphone and do their filing through the phone. So the revenue service has a application called Efiling. But most folks need training. They need help on how to use the e-filing application. So that's been a very great success, where there's an immediate impact, an immediate benefit in learning how to use these tools. So I'm very excited on the possibilities for this year on S2L. In fact, Tony, we just recruited 2 people this week, and one of the folks speaks Xhosa. So it's always about context, So I cannot market out of context. So I need to communicate and share information that has context for the target audience that I am aiming for.
You anticipated my next question on how are you sharing it? How are you letting people know? So thank you for sharing that. We have a question from John Preto of Las Vegas. His question is, Hasmukh, why do you think you became a computer nerd?
Everything around my being has context to the South African system, unfortunately. So after high school, when I wanted to go do tertiary education to university, I chose to do medicine, because doing the medicine allowed me to enroll at University of Cape Town. If I wanted to do any science related courses, I had to go to a university very far from my hometown in Durban. And so we had a university for each group. So there was an Indian university, a white university, university for mixed race groups, and a university for indigenous, what we call African Black people. So we were very separated. So John dived into it. And when I went into private practice, many of my patients said, well, we were quite impressed with a doctor with a computer on his desk. You must be really good. Well, I'm not so sure about my medical skills, but they were really impressed by my technology knowledge. So, yes, John, I stumbled into leaving medicine and doing technology full time by accident, but it was always for a cause, always for a cause. And therefore, as you as we were brought up in South Africa when we were young, even when we were studying, we were highly influenced by personalities like Steve Biko, which conscientized us and made us activists in our own realm, in our own domain. And therefore, the cause was greater, and I realized that technology had a big role to play. So, John, I am a qualified medical doctor, but technology is where I spent most of my life. But it's wonderful how life turns in circles. You know, I always say, you turn the wheel for someone, you never know how it's going to turn for you and when it's going to turn for you. So if we serve without any expectations, and that's what I've done all my life, Tony, serve with no expectations, and you will, it's unbelievable how it comes back to you in multiples. So during very torrid times in South Africa, my medical skills were utilized in serving those that are in need in terms of, you know, during protests, the reaction wasn't mild or gentle. You know, they used live bullets from the word go. So there were many injuries. And you are thrust at the forefront of that. But when I said how the wheel turns, as you know, Tony, lately I've been hosting the medical school's refresher course, which we just completed 3 days ago. And we had 48 doctors across the country, and all the specialists came to my office to present the content, cardiologists, hematologists, and so on. So, John, you know, I've come almost full circle between embracing technology and my medical skills, because it allowed me to cut the show, so to speak, because I understand the language of content that's being delivered. So when the cardiologist races through the ECGs or part of the pathology, I know exactly when to cut to the slide deck or when I need to show a particular graphic. And therefore, my medical skills haven't been lost. You know, I apply them. But Tony, you know, I'm embarking on a, I believe you have to reinvent yourself regularly. I think that it's important to stay relevant, and therefore that's what I've managed to do. So now we are in discussions with the medical school to host events between our academic hospitals and our non-academic hospitals. Many of our hospitals in the rural areas. And through technology, we can then enhance and promote the skills for better health care in larger parts of our country than it's possible by in-person and person-to-person knowledge sharing.
That's amazing. The 48 doctors, how varied were their locations?
very, I think there were 4 from Cape Town itself, and the rest were from the rest of the country, more up north, from Namibia, Botswana, Sudan. We had somebody from the Middle East. So that particular program is well recognized on the continent, with University of Cape Town being one of the eminent universities on the continent. So it's a sought after program. And I'm hoping that the university can attract more and more participants where geographical location does not become a barrier.
That's fantastic. We want to extend an invitation to those who are watching, listening, to ask questions. We are only going to be here for an hour with Dr. Gajjar. It is after 3 a.m. for him, and we want to be respectful of his time. So this is a good time to ask your questions. If you would like to ask Dr. Gajjar some questions while we're still here. And before I go to the next question, I think it's important for you to mention your involvement with Nelson Mandela and some of the things that you had, because, and the reason why I mention it was because you mentioned about your first usage with computers and how that actually became a means to support the movement. So if you don't mind sharing some of that, and if you want a little bit more detail about that conversation, then you have to go back to previous conversations that I've had with Dr. Gajjar on Conversation with Tony Mobley.
Well, very briefly, while I was in practice in medicine, I was one of the few people that had a computer within the community. And this was long before the ANC was unbanned. Must have been 84, 85, so almost 4 or 5 years before that. And it was very difficult to distribute or have posters and pamphlets and printed, because the system was quite draconian. So I had a laser printer, a postscript laser printer, color postscript laser printer. And the activists found that very useful. So I was proficient in both Harvard Graphics, which was on Windows, and PageMaker on Apple environment. And at the end of the day, when my practice was closed, these folks would come to my practice and use my computers to print posters and pamphlets. And so I was the print shop. And they would then leverage not only the computing devices I had, but also our knowledge. So then I created a database of all the doctors in the region who were considered to be safe. Safe meaning that they would not succumb to the authorities who were looking for information around patients that they had seen. And then when we had our first elections, before that, when the leaders came back to South Africa from exile, including our first president, they met the government here, the then government, for talks. It's called the Grote Skeer Minutes. And they came to me and said, Doc, we need computers. The leadership actually are very proficient in WordPerfect. Do you know WordPerfect? So yeah, of course I know it perfect. So I supplied them the computers that they utilized in preparation for engagement and negotiations with the government. And then after
Fantastic.
during the first election, again they utilized. So I got noticed. And then I was asked to set up the network in the head office in Johannesburg. And that's when I met Madiba, as we fondly used to call him, Nelson Mandela. And he knew who I was. It's not as if I was intimate, it's he just knew but he had an incredible memory and an incredible ability to remember names. So I met him 5, 6 years later again. And I was completely shocked that this very busy man said, "Hi, Hasmukh. How's the computer wheels going in the country? Are they still turning?"
That's fantastic.
So that was a real privilege, real privilege. But,
I want you,
sorry,
go ahead.
I want to make sure people understand that it wasn't as if I was very close to Madiba. He just got to know what I did. That's about it.
Thank you for sharing that story. I want you to share your website again. It is S2L.online. And I
Correct.
want you to just share a little bit about what actual videos on there. I know that there are basic instructions on how to use Google applications. A lot of them are animated. Amazed. I am amazed at the quality of them. And if my team, if you can, let's pull up S2L.online so that we can share that before the conversation is over. But just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that as I said, we were blogging these videos, so they didn't have a particular cluster of videos that. So instead of creating a playlist, for example, in YouTube, we opted to put it on our own website that one of our colleagues on office hours, Ken Jordan, facilitated and advised how to put the site together. And I was quite chuffed by the name we chose, something to learn.online, S2L Online. And so we have great plans this year. So what you see right now on the site is a sample of what is possible. Again, the emphasis is on understanding and diving deeper into the applications. So whether it's a course on Google, understanding on all the Google apps that come already preloaded on most of the devices, or Facebook. People use Facebook on a limited fashion, or WhatsApp. WhatsApp is almost ubiquitous in South Africa. Businesses, most of the folks use WhatsApp. And therefore, simple teaching such as you can record your voice and send a voice, you can share a contact through WhatsApp, you can take an image and then share that with WhatsApp. The youth are not a problem, as I said. I always worry about those who are at work, the working class, the fathers and the mothers. And if the fathers and mothers have the appreciation of the smartphone as a mobile computing device, they are then better placed to guide their children on promoting it as a learning tool rather than just entertainment and consuming content. So we even have a course on two-factor authentication. Many of these courses are in Xhosa. So if you actually go to the English courses, the buzzword in South Africa is 4IR. Everybody's talking about 4IR. Our president speaks about 4IR. Every politician talks about the 4IR. So we thought the community needs to understand what the heck is 4IR. So we did a video on 4IR. What is the fourth industrial revolution? And which are the technologies that make up fourth industrial revolution? And most importantly, how will this affect the workplace? So therefore, we need to create awareness that one needs to acquire these digital skills to remain relevant as technology dismediates the workplace, the economy. So, Tony, I'm very excited about the site that we have and the content that we have. So, from Clubhouse to Android to Microsoft Teams to WhatsApp to Zoom, and then we've got that our IRS application called Efiling. So that's called SARS, South African Revenue Services, Efiling. You'll find that in English and in Xhosa. What we want to embark on is some of the Microsoft applications, spreadsheets, the presentations applications like PowerPoint. But our approach is going to be, rather than teaching you an application, let's teach you the principles. So what is a spreadsheet? You could be using any spreadsheet, whether it's Excel or numbers. But let's explain what columns and rows mean and what formulas mean, and then teach how to set up a budget or how to utilize the spreadsheet in schools, in communities, and so on and so on. So that's really, rather than teaching a specific application, our objective is to teach principles of these applications.
I think it's important for us to talk about, you mentioned that the majority of the South African population is at a disadvantage technology-wise, and I would say that we have in the United States the opportunity to utilize a lot of technology. However, I'm not sure that we are in a position to actually utilize it from a standpoint of it being a production device. We seem to, and I'm generalizing, we seem to use it primarily as consumption. And some of the applications that you are mentioning and some of the use cases that you have mentioned, I think are applicable for us here in the United States. And I was just wondering, have you considered possibly, because there are a lot of people in the U.S. who are using Apple devices, but I based on what you just said, some of those applications, it doesn't matter whether they're Android, Apple, or Google, that they could be instructed and shared. But I was just wondering, would you be willing to embrace the iOS part in terms of specifically, reaching here in the United States? Because I think there is a need here as well.
Yes. No, I see S2L as a reservoir that may have, you could be in any country. So obviously Android was important in the context of South Africa. You know, I've been on the iPhone since the very first iPhone. And in MobiLearn, we are also wall-to-wall Apple. Being in the video animation and production side of it, we on the Apple environment. So the person we just brought on, in fact, last week, we opted then to say we need to have a blended learning both on Apple and on Android. So we can put out this content and we can show it how it's done on an iPhone and how it's done on an Android. And then create a live event for Q&As. So people who've gone through the content then can come to that event and have a discussion. I didn't quite understand how I manage this particular process. So to answer your question directly, your guidance is really appreciated, and it may have pushed up the timetable to look at iOS as well as a very relevant platform. Yes. So that's my promise, Tony. By middle of March, you'll have your first series of iOS content on S2L.
You heard it here. You've heard it here on Conversation with Tony Mobley. Thank you, Dr. Gajjar, for that. And so the next question is, what should parents and grandparents encourage their children to do with their pocket computers? And based on what you've already said, I'm going to answer the question from the standpoint, it may be the children that need to encourage their parents and grandparents, maybe.
Absolutely correct. I mentioned how children are very comfortable with these devices. The only intervention needed is to guide the children to utilize these for productivity rather than just purely consumption. And then also to make the device safe. So, and hence my notion that the parents need to be digitally literate. With that literacy comes the ability and capacity to provide guidance and supervision. But you're quite right. The detail can be learned from the children, but the children will teach them how they consume rather than how they are productive on these devices. So I think the productivity aspect, we will probably have to bank on the parents rather than just the children.
Very cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. We're going to ask you now about something you alluded to earlier. Please tell us about your continued professional and personal development.
Well, as you may know, I turned 70 in 21, and my daughter designed this cake with me slumped on a desk with a ring light and a mic and a set of golf bags next to me. When one of my sons spoke at that event, said the one thing he has admired is my ability to reinvent myself. I think it's more being conscious and being aware of how you need to grow and learn new skills and new capabilities to provide relevance and to be a contributor So, in the context of South Africa, contribution has been a constant aspect of our lives. How can I make a difference? How can I change things in my country? So, and therefore that means reinventing yourself as we have traversed over the last 3 or 4 decades. So, reinventing myself hasn't been a conscious process. You were just thrust into it. But I think there's an element of what I would call curiosity. Curiosity to learn new skills, to acquire new knowledge, additional knowledge. And how can I apply that in what I am passionate about? And believe me, that's how all of us stumbled into office hours. We learned so much. And now, after 2.5 years, I am confident of being able to create that linkage between the academic institution at medical school and rural health providers and enhance their knowledge. Even very qualified doctors in non-academic hospitals. Academically, it's a very lonely place, and you are not always at the forefront of the development in medicine. So, to answer your question, reinventing myself has never been a conscious decision. It's just I got swamped by events around me. And, but I think the underlying two combinations of constantly asking myself, how can I make things better? And secondly, curiosity. Those two things allow you to reinvent yourself and remain healthy. Oh, they say great leaders, they have the stamina.
I didn't catch that.
Oh dear. You have, Sir is being quite rude. So I am very fortunate that I've been able to be physically active. So Tony, I run twice a week. I go to gym twice a week. I play golf once a week. And I have a kineticist who does stretches for me once a week. And I think that body and mind combination becomes quite important.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to let you know that we have gotten quite a few shout outs to you. You are not awake alone this evening. we have the whole Office Hours crew celebrating you being on. Liberty White, David Paskin, Rabbi David Paskin, John Preto, and the list goes on. And I've forgotten some of the names that I've gotten in my ear, but if they will share their names again, I don't mind shouting them out. Ray Franklin, Guy Cochran, and the whole Office Hours community is watching and listening on the back end, as well as through Conversation with Tony Mobley. And so you're not awake. It's not just me and you.
That's wonderful.
We have Zachary Sorensen, who's working our YouTube. He is in Auckland, Australia, yes, I believe. And so we have a whole crew that's awake with you tonight. And I just wanted to let you know that you're not here. It's not just me and you talking. So everybody else is listening as well.
Well, we know how to salute them, right?
Absolutely. We know how to do it.
Yes.
Can you share just briefly how you got involved with Office Hours?
Like many of us, we've been following Alex on MacBreak Weekly. I think I've been following him since 2007 or 2008. In fact, Alex was on office hours, uh, very excited on the birth of his son. And I remember that so distinctly. And Alex then, as you know, started up Pixel Core, and I signed up for that. So I guess I ended up on the mailing list at Pixel Core. But in 2013, in San Francisco, I approached Alex to meet, and I said to Alex at that time, he was very kind enough to take me for lunch. And I said to Alex, I'm thinking of creating training videos. What are your thoughts? I think videos are going to be quite important from an education point of view. And I'll never forget what Alex said to me. He said, Hasmukh, our DNA is designed to learn visually. So visually, we learn far more efficiently than reading text. And so he said to me, you are on the right path, and that's the way to go, because videos are going to become huge. This was 2013. So I came back from San Francisco really excited about this course that I was taking at that time, which was creating videos. And so that's when I met Alex. And then I saw this email about office hours. And that's how I got into office hours. Like you, Tony, very gingerly, very quietly. I think I was there for, and you know, Mr. Preto keeps all the information, the statistics. You can probably tell us when I first spoke on office hours. And I watched it for quite a while before I had the courage to speak. And it's been an amazing experience.
Yeah, I used to listen and watch as I started my cancer journey, and it was amazing. I started following. Alex used to do meerkats from his time in Africa.
Yes, correct.
And so
correct.
I used to watch all of those, and I remember him very distinctly from MacBreak Weekly back in the day when they were downstairs from Leo, and so it was easy. It was an easy transition for me to start following, to continue to follow him, and to define office hours. And it just came at a good time for me in terms of where I was and the things that I was going through. So I was happy to be there, and still are happy to be a part of the community.
Sorry, Tony. My only disappointment is that I haven't succeeded many others from my continent to participate in office hours as regulars. So it is a little discouraging that literally I'm the only person from this continent who's a regular on office hours. And so, in fact, I made a point of literally promoting the need to expose yourself to office hours, because really it's a fountain of information and knowledge. And so I constantly still promote this issue about looking good, sounding good. So for the medical event, I went through all 48 doctors on how to look good and sound good. And with every one of them, I said, you need to go to office hours and look at some of the previous episodes on YouTube, or just attend one or two sessions. And all you have to do is look at how people look and how they sound, because online participation is going to be with us forever. So
Absolutely.
yes, that's one of my other passions and one of the other things that I promote, Tony.
Yeah, I try to share with as many people as I can that, you know, how you look on camera is it's like putting on a good suit and some nice shiny shoes.
Yes.
And it makes all the difference in terms of how people perceive you, because we are visual people and visual creatures, and we go by what we see first, and then if the content is good, then we will hear it. But sometimes the content can be very good, but we don't like the way in which it looks. And so you know, that's one of the things that I share. And even in the context of houses of worship, you know, it's important how you appear. Sometimes people need to see you look good before they can even hear what you're sharing. And it's just part of the human condition. And a lot of times people don't understand. You know, there was a conversation today where there was in after hours where there was this conversation about the importance of how important good sound is, how important it is to look good, and that sometimes people are not aware why they are disinterested or participating in the narrative about Zoom fatigue, and how Zoom fatigue is really nothing more than an issue with the quality of video and the quality of sound. And that when there is good sound and when there is good video, people can talk for hours and hours and hours without getting tired. So
Well,
I didn't mean to get off into all of that, but
no, I'm extremely critical and forthright. So one of our previous finance ministers and, you know, even leaders in business that I not know intimately, but I know them, I text them or I call them up and I said, in fact, I met a CEO of a very large mobile company 2 weeks ago. And I was explaining to him, and he said, "But I have my video off all the time. Why should I put it on?" And I had this very short discourse with him. He's now asked me to speak to his entire executive team on how to dress up for online meetings. I pointed him to, I think during one of our Zoom courses, has dressing up for a virtual meeting. And I said, very much resonates with what you've said, Tony. How do we dress up for online meetings? You often said in office hours, you buy suit, you buy nice looking clothing. You need the bare minimum to look good and sound good. So that's one of my other mission this year, is to promote the heck out of looking good, sounding good.
absolutely.
When we watch the telly, I just catch up on the news, and every time I see somebody that's not looking good, but worse, using a virtual background, I immediately get up, take my phone, and I literally take a video of what's going on. And I showed them to the doctors 4 weeks ago. I said, whatever you do, please do not use a virtual background. And most of them looked puzzled. Then I showed them the videos of personalities, luminaries in our country, politicians, CEOs, very big organizations. I said, observe how they look. and they were devastated. So I'm happy that none of them used the virtual background.
Absolutely. We are out of time, sir. Thank you so much for being with me tonight. I just want to read one question, really a comment. It's been an honor to meet you, Hasmukh, and that's from Zachary Sorensen of Auckland, Australia. Thank you so much again, sir, for being here. Conversation with Tony Mobley is produced by valued audio visual professionals who meet daily on Office Hours Global, hosted by Alex Lindsay. Thank you, Z98.1 FM, LinkedIn Live, YouTube, and tonight, Facebook. Conversation with Real People. Last week, we had a great conversation with Mr. Michael Forrest of Squares TV. No, we didn't. We had a great conversation with Mr. Stan Bush. And if you have time, please go back and look at 80 plus episodes of Conversation with Tony Mobley. We thank you. We hope that you will find something that you like and that is helpful. Conversation with Tony Mobley can be heard on 98.1fm.com, our radio audience in Cincinnati, Ohio. Thank you, Taylor Sonderhouse and team behind Conversation with Tony Mobley. Dr. Hasmukh Gajjar, thank you for your conversation today and for doing the work that you do. Thank you for being the person who you are. Conversation with Tony Mobley continues next week. We are having a Blab reunion conversation next week. That's right, Blab. Blab is coming on Conversation with Tony Mobley next week. Thank you all so much. Good night. Take care. Have a blessed evening or good morning wherever you are in the world. Take care. Good night. Thank you.